My daughter called me useless while she held the key to the storage unit where she had already put half my things. My son just laughed and said, "Don't worry, we'll FaceTime you from the party." That's when it hit me. They weren't just leaving me behind. They were trying to erase me, like I never mattered. So, I booked a cruise, disappeared for a whole week, and came back with a brand new will to make sure neither of them would ever get a penny. You want to hear what happened? When I walked back into my house, and they thought I was gone forever. Trust me, it only gets worse. I was in the kitchen, peeling a sticker off a cantaloupe when my daughter Marissa walked in. She had that look on her face, the one she used to wear when she wanted something big, like my credit card or a new car. But this time, she had Kevin with her, and neither of them were smiling. "Mom, we need to talk," Marissa said. I actually laughed because I thought maybe they were planning a surprise party for my 65th birthday next week. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, sat down, and waited. Then Kevin looked me straight in the eye and said, in a cold, practiced voice, "We think it's time you moved into assisted living. You're not managing like you used to." I blinked, completely confused. "What are you talking about?" I said. "I'm fine." And I really was. I walked every morning, took my medicine, cooked my meals, and kept the house clean. I didn't forget anything important, but they didn't care. Marissa crossed her arms and snapped, "You left the oven on twice. You keep watching the same shows and forgetting what day it is." I laughed again, but this time, it was bitter. "You think that means I need to be put in a home?" That's when it hit me what this was really about. Kevin looked down the hallway and said, "Look, we've talked to Aunt Vivian. She's helped us see that it's not fair for you to expect us to keep supporting you." Those words stopped me cold. Supporting me. I raised them alone after their father died. I paid for Kevin to go to tech school. I let Marissa move back in 3 times when her relationships fell apart. I bought their groceries, kept the lights on, and paid the mortgage. "What support?" I said quietly. "You just want me out." Marissa didn't even argue. She folded her arms and said, "It's time we found you a place that takes Medicare. It's only 20 minutes away. They have group bingo." My hands started to shake. "You're trying to dump me because you don't want to pay for my birthday dinner," I said, my voice cracking. Kevin looked guilty, but Marissa just stared at her nails. "It's not just that," she mumbled. "We've been covering a lot, and you act like we owe you forever." They didn't even know I'd been skipping my own doctor visits just so I could buy school clothes for their kids. My heart was beating so fast I felt dizzy. I walked into the living room, and that's when I saw the bookshelf. Half my photo albums were gone. "Where's my stuff?" I asked, my voice shaking. Kevin followed me, pretending to be casual. "We moved a few things to the storage unit. Thought it might help you start decluttering. It's easier when you don't have to do it all yourself." "You touched Dad's things," I whispered. They'd even taken the framed photo from our wedding, the one that sat on the mantel for 40 years. "It's all safe," Kevin said. "We just wanted to help. We figured once you were settled in, it wouldn't matter." That's when the anger hit me like a wave. "You're not doing this for me," I snapped. "You're doing it for her. Vivian put this in your heads, didn't she?" They looked away. I stepped forward, trembling. "She always hated me for keeping this house. She thought it should have been hers." I grabbed my phone, and they didn't even try to stop me. I opened our family group chat and scrolled through messages I'd ignored for months, thinking they were just updates or silly jokes. But now I read them for what they really were. "Vivian, if you don't act soon, the house will rot with her in it." Marissa, "Yeah, we'll throw a freedom party when she's finally in that home." Kevin, "Still need to get the title switched. Her signature is shaky anyway. Shouldn't be hard." I felt like I couldn't breathe. They'd been planning this for months behind my back. I walked past them without a word and went into the garage. I just needed air, space, a way to escape. It was cold in there, with only one buzzing light. I pulled down a box labeled Jeff's Stuff, my late husband's things. When I opened it, I found an old brochure from 1989. It was for a cruise line we always dreamed about. We never went. He died before we could book a trip. I sat on a folding chair, staring at that faded blue cover with the picture of waves and palm trees. The words across the front said, "It's never too late to go." Just then, my phone buzzed. A new text from Kevin. "We'll send a van next week to help you pack. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I looked back at that brochure and knew exactly what I was going to do next. I looked at that message and right then, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to pack up my house. I wasn't going to move into any home. I wasn't even going to argue with them. No, I would leave on my own terms. They probably pictured me as some sad old woman crying over a casserole dish. Instead, I decided I'd disappear for a week without telling them, and when I came back, nothing would ever be the same again. I stayed in the garage long after the light shut itself off. I sat there on that cold folding chair with the cruise brochure still in my lap. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt tears on my neck and saw that the paper was getting wet and curling up. I traced the shiny letters with my fingerites. Never too late to go. It felt like those words were calling out to me, offering me some hidden door to a life where I wasn't treated like a carton of milk past its date. I don't even know what made me open the safe after all these years, but something told me to look behind my husband's old tax papers and the cigar box full of coins, and there it was, a yellow envelope marked legal. It was Jeff's original will. My heart skipped a beat. I'd completely forgotten it existed. Years ago, Vivian kept pushing us to update everything after Jeff died, and like a fool, I let her handle it. She told me she'd file the new version and handle all the paperwork. But when I opened that envelope and started reading, I knew right away this wasn't the will she said was on file. This one made me the sole owner of everything. No trust splits, no power of attorney, no mention of Vivian at all. My hands were shaking. She must have swapped it out for her version, the one that let her take over if I ever got confused. I folded that will up as neatly as I could, slipped it into a Ziploc bag, and tucked it into the tote bag I used for groceries. Just holding it felt like I had a little box of matches that could burn down everything they'd been plotting behind my back. Still sitting there in the cold garage, I opened Facebook on my old phone and typed in two names I hadn't thought about in years, Denise Morgan and Patricia Crane, my best friends from high school. Denise lived in Tampa now, divorced twice, and ran a quilting shop. Patricia was down in Fort Lauderdale, always posting corny jokes about getting older. I sent them both the same message. You guys still taking that cruise? I didn't wait for their replies. I grabbed my cracked tablet, the one Kevin always teased me about, pulled up the cruise line's website. There was a trip leaving in 3 days from Miami. 7 nights, all inclusive, with a fancy dinner for people celebrating life milestones. That was it. That was where I'd spend my 65th birthday. Not in some nursing home with strangers and soggy pudding. I punched in my credit card number and booked it. The second the confirmation hit my email, I felt this wild jolt in my chest, like I was doing something daring. Then I heard the door creak open behind me. Marissa stuck her head in. What are you doing out here? It's freezing. I quickly shoved the envelope deeper into my tote. Just looking through some old photos before you toss everything, I said. She rolled her eyes. No one's tossing anything. God, you're so dramatic. Then she flipped off the light and left. I sat there alone in the dark and smiled. For the first time in days, the next morning, I packed light, just one suitcase, and that envelope hidden inside a shoe at the bottom. I told them I was going to visit a friend in Naples for the week. They didn't even question it. They probably figured I'd be gone for good soon anyway, so what did it matter? I bought a cheap Greyhound ticket to Miami and turned off the family tracking app Kevin installed for my safety. At the bus station, my phone buzzed. Denise had written back, "Yes, we're boarding. Same ship. You coming?" A minute later, Patricia messaged, "You're going to love this. Spa and wine." No judgment. I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. They didn't ask why. They didn't have to. That night, I stayed in a little roadside motel and ate crackers from the vending machine for dinner. But for the first time in forever, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen next or how I'd face things when I came back. But I did know one thing. I'd rather be floating in the middle of the ocean than drowning in my own house while the kids I raised measured the curtains for their inheritance. I was done waiting for someone to come save me. I was going to save myself. And when I finally stepped onto that cruise ship, I swear, I felt the weight of Ohio slide right off my shoulders like an old winter coat. The air smelled like salt and pineapple and freedom. Denise spotted me first. She yelled my name across the terminal like we were teenagers sneaking out of class again. Patricia was right behind her, rolling a huge flowery suitcase and crying, before we even hugged. "You look like hell," Denise said, grinning from ear to ear. Perfect timing. I didn't tell them everything, not yet. I just said my kids had done some things that hurt me, and I needed a break. Denise didn't push for details. She never did. That night, the three of us dressed up and went to the adults-only lounge. On the ship, a cover band was playing Fleetwood Mac songs a little off-key, but nobody cared. I had one glass of wine, then another, and by the time I was working on my third, I could feel the heavy, numb feeling in my chest finally starting to melt away. That's when I met Mason. He was behind the bar, wiping it down, and that way you can tell he'd done it 1,000 times. But when he looked up, there was something honest in his face, not flirty, not fake. He looked me right in the eye when I said, "Cabernet, please." "Rough day?" he asked, tilting his head. "Rough decade," I blurted out before I could stop myself. He smiled, but he didn't laugh at me. "Then this one's on the house," he said. I watched him for a second, late 30s or maybe early 40s, wearing a black polo shirt. He had a pale line where a wedding ring used to be and tired eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. "What makes you generous to strangers?" I asked as I took a sip. He shrugged. "My mom would have been about your age. She always told me to pay attention to people who sit quiet in loud rooms." That sentence hit me right in the chest. "Would have been?" I asked softly. He nodded and wiped the same spot on the bar twice. "She died a few years ago. Dementia. My brother bailed. I was the one who moved her in and stayed overnight, gave her baths when the nurse didn't show." "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. He nodded again, then walked off to help a couple arguing about how much to tip. I didn't know why, but something in me cracked a little bit right then, not in a sad way. Just in a way that made me realize I hadn't talked to anyone who really listened in years. Denise and Patricia dragged me onto the dance floor when Dreams came on. We laughed and danced until my knees were sore, like we were back in our prom dresses at the Knights of Columbus Hall. Later, when we went back to our cabins, Denise leaned against my doorway. "You gonna tell us what really happened, Deb?" she asked gently. I looked down at my shoes. "They're trying to put me in a home," I said. "Said I'm a burden. Said I left the oven on twice and now I don't deserve to live in my own house." Denise didn't say anything right away. Then she said, dead serious, "We'll kill them." From inside her room, Patricia yelled, "We'll poison their smoothies." I laughed so hard I started crying again. Inside my room, I stared out at the dark water, holding that wine glass Mason had given me. It was empty, but it felt heavy in my hand. My phone buzzed. I picked it up and saw a message from Marissa. No words, just a video. I pressed play. It was her and Kevin, clearly tipsy, standing in what looked like my living room. They were toasting with champagne. "Happy 65th, Mom," Marissa said with a smirk I didn't recognize. "Hope you're enjoying your, freedom. Don't get lost at sea." Kevin raised his glass. "Here's to finally living life without the guilt trip." I stood there, frozen. Behind them, I could see my bookshelf stripped bare, and the wall where all our family photos used to hang on. My house, my things. And they were celebrating. I turned off the phone, set it on the bed, then walked over to the tiny desk and pulled out the envelope with Jeff's real will. I set it down in front of me. Then I opened my laptop and started making a list, not a to-do list, but a battle plan. I needed a lawyer. I needed to find out exactly what papers Vivian had filed. I needed witnesses. And I needed to make sure my children never saw a single cent of what I left behind. I wasn't just on this cruise to take a breath. I was here to make a plan. And when I came home, I wasn't going to just exist. I was going to erase every lie they'd told about me, one document at a time. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I walked alone on the upper deck, letting the wind smack my face like a reset button. I hadn't slept much after watching that video. Their smug little toast kept replaying in my head, not just because it hurt, though it did, but because it proved what I'd been starting to suspect. They didn't just want me out of their lives. They wanted my house, my money, the things Jeff and I had built and protected for decades, and they were willing to smile while they took it. After I grabbed a banana and a coffee, I wandered back to the lounge from the night before. It was quiet now, just a few early risers, playing trivia. Mason waved as I came in, but I didn't feel like talking. I nodded and slipped into a corner booth. That's when she walked in. Short gray hair, navy blazer, definitely not a tourist. She looked like the kind of woman who sits on charity boards and corrects your grammar at dinner. She ordered black tea and sat by herself, working on a crossword puzzle. She was calm but watchful, and something about her reminded me of my old school principal. The one who could stop a fistfight just by giving you that look. I don't know why, but I leaned over and said, I never knew what 9 letters meant betrayal, until recently. She lifted one eyebrow, looked right at me, and said, treacherous. I smiled at her. That'll work. We started talking. Her name was Margaret Hall. She used to be an estate lawyer in Baltimore. She specialized in messy family fights over money and inheritance. She retired 2 years ago after her husband died. She was on this cruise alone. When I told her my kids were trying to force me into assisted living against my will, she didn't even look surprised. Let me guess, she said. They're saying you're confused, forgetful, maybe even unstable. Something like that, I nodded. And they've already moved some of your things out of your house. Yes. And there's another relative in the mix, someone pushy with old legal contacts, helping them along. My stomach turned. My sister, I said. Vivian. She's been bitter ever since I ended up with the house. Margaret took a slow sip of her tea. Sounds like elder coercion mixed with inheritance manipulation. Sadly, it's common, ugly, and hard to fight unless you act early. Do you still have your husband's original will? I stared at her like she'd read my mind. I do, I said. I found it in the safe 2 nights ago. She leaned forward, eyes sharp. Have you checked your county's deed office lately? If your sister forged anything behind your back, they could be creating a legal story that you already stepped down. I hadn't even thought of that. My heart started to race. They posted my house on Zillow yesterday, I said. I got the listing link while I was out here in the middle of the ocean. Margaret let out a low whistle. Then you're on a clock. They may have used power of attorney to move the title. Do you have anyone local who can check the paperwork while you're here? A neighbor, maybe. I have Tina, I said. But I don't know what she'd find. Give me her number, Margaret said. I'll tell her exactly what to look for. If she can pull your current deed online, we'll know if your sister filed something shady. I hesitated for a second, then handed over my phone. Margaret called Tina and calmly explained what we needed. Within 20 minutes, Tina sent back a screenshot that made my stomach drop. Vivian's name was right there as trustee, not owner, not buyer, trustee. That meant she'd filed a legal document claiming I wasn't able to manage my own affairs. My throat went dry. She has no right, I whispered. Margaret didn't look surprised at all. Of course she doesn't. But rights don't matter if the paperwork looks official. You need to create a new will, one that clearly says what you want, cancels out any old ones, and proves you're of sound mind. If they ever try to fight it in court, your video, your handwriting, and your witnesses will show you knew exactly what you were doing. I nodded, feeling shaky but determined. Can we do that here? She smiled. I never go anywhere without my notary stamp. You'd be amazed how many people decide to take care of unfinished business on vacation. That afternoon, we gathered in Margaret's cabin. Denise and Patricia sat nearby, and Mason stopped in to be a witness. I recorded a video statement explaining everything what my kids had done, how Vivian had manipulated them, and why I was cutting them out of my will, not out of spite, but to protect everything Jeff and I worked for. I signed the new will with a shaky hand, but my head was clearer than it had been in years. Margaret handed me a little USB drive with the video on it. Keep this close, she said. And when you get home, don't tell them anything. Let them think you're still confused. Let them keep playing their game, and then pull the rug out from under them. As I left her cabin, something inside me shifted. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't sad either. I was ready. I was ready. I was planning. For the first time in years, I wasn't just the mother they pitied. I was the woman who was about to bury them in their own lies. The next morning was so quiet, it felt like the ocean itself was holding its breath with me. I sat on a deck chair, watching the horizon stretch out like a promise. My phone buzzed in my lap. I thought maybe it was one of the girls sending a funny meme or a picture from breakfast. But when I unlocked the screen, my blood ran cold. It was a notification from Zillow. Someone had just updated the listing for my house, not a random property, my address. I clicked the link, and a fresh batch of photos loaded. My living room, my kitchen, the backyard with the garden Jeff and I built before he got sick. New listing. Must see. My name wasn't anywhere, just some realtor I'd never heard of. And the price, they were trying to sell it fast before I could get home. My hands were shaking as I called Tina. She picked up on the third ring, sounding out of breath. Deb, I was going to call you last night, she said. Your daughter and some man were in your house again. He was measuring the windows. My voice went sharp. Are you sure? Positive, she said. They were getting it ready for staging. It didn't look like you were there by choice. I didn't want to cause a scene, but something felt really wrong. No, I whispered. My heart was thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. I opened the group chat with Margaret, Denise, and Patricia. I dropped the Zillow link, took screenshots of the listing, and sent it all. Then, almost without thinking, I texted Mason, separately. I didn't even know exactly why I messaged him. I just knew I needed someone with a steady voice. Someone who wouldn't look away. He replied right away. You okay? No, I typed back. But I will be. 5 minutes later, Margaret called. Her voice was steady, like always. This isn't just shady, she said. It's illegal. Unless they forged documents. If your name is still on the deed, it is any attempt to sell your house without your permission is fraud. They've already taken pictures, I said, pacing around my cabin. They changed the locks, rearranged everything there, acting like I've disappeared. Good, Margaret said calmly. Let them think that. We'll use their arrogance against them. But you need to prepare a fraud notice to send to your county office the moment you get back. Until then, don't let them know you've figured any of this out. Play small. Pretend you don't understand. I sat down on the bed and stared at the Zillow listing again. My coffee table was gone. My rocking chair was missing. They hadn't just tried to sell my house. They'd erased me from it. They think I'm a ghost, I whispered. Then, let's haunt them, Margaret said. And when the time comes, we'll show the court exactly who tried to bury you. That night, the ship held a fancy dinner to celebrate milestone birthdays. I stood there in a borrowed dress I hadn't worn since Jeff's funeral. When they called my name and brought out a cake, I smiled for the cameras, but inside, I was somewhere else, already back home, already picturing Marissa's face when she realized I'd never really been gone. Mason walked past our table and gave me a little nod, like he could see right through my polite smile and into the steel I was hiding underneath. Later, back in my room, I copied all the will documents onto a second USB drive and tucked it deep into the lining of my suitcase. Then I deleted the Zillow app, turned off my phone, and looked out the window at the black water, stretching on forever. They wanted me gone. They were selling my life piece by piece. But I was coming home, and when I did, I was going to show them exactly what happens when you try to erase a woman who remembers everything. 2 days later, I stepped into my house with my keys still in my hand, but the silence inside didn't feel peaceful. It felt like something had been stolen. The air didn't even smell like home anymore. It smelled too clean, like someone had scrubbed everything with lemon cleaner to hide the truth. I dropped my bag by the door and stood there for a minute, just staring into the living room. It was gutted. My rocking chair was gone. The big family photo that had hung over the fireplace since Jeff's funeral was missing. The rug we bought on our 30th anniversary was either rolled up or replaced. Now there was nothing but cold, shiny laminate flooring. It looked like a showroom, not a home. I walked in slowly, like I wasn't even sure if I was allowed to be there. The couch was still in place, but the pillows were gone. Half the bookshelf sat empty. In the hallway closet, my winter coat was missing. My old boots were gone. In the kitchen, there was a brand new toaster, new dish soap, no mug in the sink, no dish towel on the stove. Like no one lived there at all, or someone else did. I opened the fridge. It was almost empty. Just a 6-pack of sparkling water I'd never bought and a carton of almond milk I couldn't even drink. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Room by room, I documented everything, each empty shelf, every missing photo, every drawer that had been wiped clean. I whispered into the camera as I moved, describing it all like I was cataloging a crime scene, because that's exactly what this was, a slow-motion burglary carried out by people who didn't even bother wearing masks because they were my own family. As I turned back to the living room, the front door opened. Kevin walked in like he owned the place. He stopped dead when he saw me standing there, phone in hand. "Mom," he said. His voice was caught somewhere between guilt and surprise. "You're back." "I wasn't supposed to be, was I?" I asked. He looked over his shoulder, probably hoping Marissa would come in behind him. "We thought you were still in Florida," he mumbled. "You said you'd be at Denise's for the week, and that meant you could start staging the house," I asked, tilting my head. "Without my name on the contract, without my permission." He didn't answer. He just shifted his weight like he wanted to disappear. Vivian said the trust was active. He started weakly. That you were stepping down. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. Is that what she told you? That I'm senile? That I've handed over my own life? His mouth tightened. Look, Marissa handled most of the paperwork. I just saved the Zillow link. Thanks for that, by the way. I cut in. Real smooth. I walked over to the fireplace and pointed to the empty space where my wedding photo had been. Tell me where it is. My wedding picture. My grandmother's quilt. The letters from Jeff. We didn't throw anything out. He said quickly, they're in storage. Marissa thought we should clear space before I got locked up in some group home. I snapped, before the ink dried on your forged documents. He stepped forward, suddenly defensive. You're overreacting. Vivian showed us everything. She said you were confused, that you'd lost track of your meds, that you were endangering yourself. I have a will, I said, my voice low and steady now. A new one, with video evidence, with witnesses, filed and notarized. It cancels out everything Vivian touched. I took a step closer so he could see exactly how serious I was. You want to keep talking about confusion? Let's do it in front of a judge. His eyes widened. He stared at me like he was seeing me for the very first time. You recorded a new will on the cruise. I looked her right in the eye. I did, I said calmly. With a retired estate lawyer, 2 witnesses, and a full list of everything you all removed from this house. The room went quiet. I could almost see Kevin's mind racing, trying to figure out how bad they'd messed up. Then the front door swung open again, and Marissa walked in, carrying her giant purse and a big Starbucks cup, smiling like she'd just signed papers for a fancy condo. But as soon as she saw me standing there, her smile disappeared. What the hell? She snapped, stopping dead. You're not supposed to be here, clearly, I said. You all sold me a ticket out of here and thought I'd never come back. She shot a look at Kevin, who was staring down at his shoes like a little boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar. We had a plan, she hissed, her voice shaking with anger. You agreed to stay in Florida to think about your future. Meanwhile, you cleaned out my past, I said, my voice steady. You deleted every sign I ever lived in this house. She took a step closer, her face flushed. You can't just walk back in and undo everything. I raised my phone so she could see it. Actually, I can, and I already have. Her face turned pale. I looked at both of them, standing there like a couple of kids who'd gotten caught, and said one last thing before I walked down the hall to my bedroom, praying my nightstand hadn't been emptied out too. You'd better call Vivian, because this little game, it's over. And next time we talk, it won't be in this house, it'll be in court. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was scared, because I wasn't, but because my mind kept replaying every lie, every fake smile, every quiet betrayal that brought us to this moment. They had cleaned out my home while I was still alive and breathing. They'd made plans for my life like I was already buried. And now they had the nerve to act shocked when I walked through my own front door. I lay in bed with the door locked tight, the USB drive with my video will zipped in the pocket of my robe, and a notebook on my nightstand where I was writing down every name, every date, every little detail I could remember. At 6:30 in the morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My hands didn't even shake when I picked up my phone and texted Vivian. We need to talk. Today, she replied almost right away. Fine, I'll stop by after lunch. No apology, no explanation. Just like always, like she still thought she was in charge. Around noon, I changed into the blue cardigan Jeff always liked. Something about it made me feel strong, grounded, ready. I laid out everything on the table. Copies of the original will, the notarized update, screenshots of the Zillow listing, and the group chat messages I'd printed out the night before. I didn't want to yell. I didn't want drama. I just wanted her to sit there and see, clear as day, that the little kingdom she thought she was building was nothing but wet cardboard. When she showed up, she didn't even knock. She just walked in like it was still 1998, and she was stopping by to borrow sugar, wearing one of her fancy scarves and too much perfume. Well, she said, her eyes sweeping over the room, you've made quite the mess of things. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. Sit down. She raised her eyebrow. Excuse me? I said sit, I repeated, my voice flat and cold as a stone. You're not taking another step in this house until we're done. She let out a little scoff but pulled out a chair and sat. I'm assuming this is about your performance the other night, she asked. Performance? I laughed. Vivian, you forged a trust document. You encouraged my kids to break into my home and tried to sell it while I was gone. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a crime." She tilted her head and let out this little sigh. "Oh, Deborah, don't be so dramatic. I was only trying to help. You were struggling. Everyone could see it. Helping yourself," I said, my voice sharp. "You've hated me since Jeff's funeral. You couldn't stand that he left me this house. And now, because I'm over 60 and don't post selfies, you thought I'd be too stupid to catch you rewriting my life." For a second, her face twitched. Just a little, but enough. "The kids asked me to step in," she said. "They were scared. You'd left the stove on. You kept repeating stories. They weren't sure you could handle." I slid the stack of papers across the table. "That's the original will. That's the notarized update. And that's a signed letter from a retired estate attorney who will testify in court that I was clear-minded and perfectly capable when I canceled every power you thought you had." Vivian stared at the papers but didn't touch them. "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, my voice low. "You think this is about revenge. It's not. It's about boundaries, about consequences. You had my children sneaking into my house and selling off my things while you told them I'd never fight back." She stood up, her hands trembling. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said, rising so we were eye to eye. "You are, because I've sent copies of every document to 3 lawyers, and I've recorded this whole conversation, including what you just said." Her eyes went wide. "What? There's a camera right under that clock," I said. She turned and saw the blinking red light, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked scared. "You wouldn't." "I already did," I said, "and tomorrow, if you don't call that realtor and cancel the listing, I'll send this recording to the county court and the local paper. Elder fraud is a felony in this state. Vivian, you don't get to play puppet master anymore." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. For a second, she looked like a kid caught lying about breaking a vase. And that's when I realized she'd never really been powerful. She'd just been practiced. And I had finally stopped letting her write my story. She turned and walked out without a word. No slamming doors, no clever insults, just quiet. When the door clicked shut, I felt lighter than I had in years. I sat back down and finally let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since Florida. My hands were still shaking, but not from fear, more like relief. I texted Margaret, "Vivian's out, next step." Her reply came fast. "Prepare for court. You just won the first battle. Now let's finish the war." The courthouse was colder than I expected, not just the air, but the feeling, like every little sound echoing down those big marble hallways was there to remind you who was really in charge. Margaret was waiting outside, holding a thick manila folder stuffed with everything we'd gathered over the past 10 days. My new will, the video of me signing it, the fake trust paperwork, Zillow screenshots, the group texts, even the timeline we'd put together on the cruise. She didn't look like someone on vacation anymore. She looked like a lawyer again. "You ready for this?" she asked me, her voice calm but firm. "They're not going to hold back." "Neither am I," I told her. We walked in, side by side. Kevin was slumped on a bench, his tie loose, his hands shaking like he was about to be called into the principal's office. Across the room, Marissa stood in a bright blazer that didn't even match her shoes, hugging a folder to her chest. Vivian was nowhere to be seen, coward. When the bailiff called my name, Margaret and I stepped into a small probate courtroom. It felt too private and too public all at once, like everyone in there could hear my heartbeat. The judge was a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses and a face that said she didn't have time for nonsense. Marissa's lawyer started rambling right away, saying I was confused, that I'd been manipulated, that my new will wasn't real. I didn't flinch. Margaret didn't even blink. "Your Honor," she said, standing up smooth as anything, "I'd like to show evidence proving Ms. Kessler was fully aware and capable when she made her new will. Here's a video of her explaining her wishes in her own words, recorded with 2 witnesses and time-stamped before any trust documents were filed, by her sister or heirs." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Margaret played the video. There I was, on screen, sitting in that little cruise ship cabin, talking plain and clear, listing every name, every reason, every betrayal. The room went so quiet you could have heard a pin drop when the video ended with me saying, "I am doing this not from anger, but from protection." I looked up. Kevin had tears in his eyes. He couldn't even meet my gaze. Marissa just rolled her eyes, like she still thought this was all some petty fight. Then Margaret laid out the photos of my empty house, the Zillow listing, Tina's signed statement about them sneaking in. Last, she put the fake trust paperwork right in front of the judge. This, she said, her voice steady, was filed by Ms. Vivian Wells without Ms. Kessler's consent. She tried to take control of this estate while my client was fully competent and alive. The judge adjusted her glasses, looked over the signatures, then stared straight at Marissa's lawyer. "Do you have any evidence to counter this?" she asked. He stammered, "Just verbal testimony, Your Honor." "Verbal testimony doesn't cancel out forged documents," the judge snapped. "This is serious." Then she turned to me. "Ms. Kessler, is there anything you'd like to say before I make my ruling?" I stood up slowly. My knees were stiff and my heart was pounding, but my voice was strong. "Your Honor," I said, "my children didn't just try to erase me from my own life. They started making plans for my death while I was still standing right here. They took what wasn't theirs and toasted each other for it. I'm not here to punish them. I'm here to protect what my husband and I built, and to make sure the next woman they try this on sees it coming before it's too late." The judge nodded once. She didn't even look like she needed to think. "The court finds Ms. Kessler's updated will valid and enforceable," she said. "The forged trust is voided. All powers of attorney are revoked. Full control of the estate returns to Ms. Kessler immediately. I am also referring Ms. Wells for investigation of possible elder fraud." Marissa gasped like a fish out of water. Kevin put his face in his hands. Margaret gave my arm a little squeeze. The gavel came down hard on the desk. Just like that, it was over. Out in the hallway, Kevin shuffled up to me, eyes red. He wouldn't even look me in the face. "I didn't know she forged anything," he whispered. "I thought we were helping yourselves," I said. "You stood by and watched them strip my life for parts." He didn't argue, just nodded and walked away. Marissa didn't say a single word. She just stormed off, her heels clicking against the floor like the sound of a door slamming behind her. I turned to Margaret, who was already packing up her folder. "You didn't just save my house," I told her, voice catching in my throat. "You saved me. You did that yourself," she said gently. "I just handed you the matches." That night, I sat in my bedroom, the bedroom they hadn't managed to gut, and lit the candle Jeff had given me on our last anniversary. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in the quiet, finally feeling like I was home again. I just watched the candle flame dance in the dark, feeling still for the first time in months. Safe. Tomorrow, I'd decide what came next. It had been 5 days since the court ruling. I hadn't heard a word from Marissa. No calls, no texts, not even a half-hearted insult pretending to be concerned. That didn't surprise me. But Kevin Caven sent a letter. Not an email, not a message. An actual handwritten letter, folded neatly into a cream envelope, like we were back in 1984. I found it while I was out front pulling weeds, trying to fix all the little messes they'd left behind. For a moment I just held it, debating whether to toss it straight into the trash. But curiosity got the better of me. I sat down on the porch steps, peeled it open, and read. It wasn't long. He wrote that he was sorry, that he'd filed for divorce, that he knew he'd been too weak to stand up to Vivian and Marissa when it mattered. He said watching that video of me in court made him realize how far he'd let himself fall, how easy it had been to pick silence over loyalty. At the bottom, there was a phone number and a single line. "If you ever decide to call, I'll answer." I didn't cry. I didn't feel relieved. I just felt tired. That kind of betrayal doesn't disappear because someone feels guilty after the damage is done. But the fact he'd put pen to paper meant something. He hadn't tried to spin it. He didn't ask for anything. He just admitted the truth. 2 days later, I called him. I used a payphone outside the old diner we used to go to after church when he was little. He picked up on the second ring, breathless, like he hadn't stopped hoping. I told him to meet me there in 30 minutes. When I walked in, he was already sitting in the back booth with 2 mugs of coffee. I didn't hug him. I didn't sit across from him either. I slid in beside him, the way I used to when he was 6 and afraid of thunderstorms. He looked older than I remembered, like shame had aged him overnight. "You look tired," I said. He nodded. "Haven't slept much." We sat in silence for a while. Then he started. "Mom, I held up my hand. "No speeches. I've heard enough words in court to last a lifetime." He nodded again. "Fair. So what now?" I asked. "Are you here because you really want to fix this, or because you're trying to sleep better at night?" He looked down at his hands, Both, your kids, I asked quietly. Do they know what you did? They know, he said. I told them I messed up. I told them their grandma isn't going anywhere unless she damn well chooses to. I looked out the window at the same parking lot, the same gas station across the street. But the little boy I used to bring here was gone. And this man next to me, he was someone I'd have to get to know all over again. You want forgiveness, I finally said. That's not something I can hand out like coupons. You want a relationship. You're going to have to build it from the ground up. No shortcuts, no guilt trips, just time and proof. I'll take it, he said, his voice quiet. Even if it takes the rest of my life. I nodded once. Then I slid the untouched coffee toward him and stood up. Then, I guess we'll see. Outside, the air was warm and thick with summer. I walked home with my hands in my pockets, not thinking about what had been stolen, but what was finally mine again. That night, I pulled out the foundation paperwork, the Kessler Legacy Fund. It had started as an idea on the cruise, just a thought about how to help people like me keep from being erased. But now it was real. I'd met with the bank, opened the accounts, named Margaret as my legal advisor. The first donation came from selling some old collectibles Jeff had hidden away in a storage locker. The second came from a publisher who'd heard about my case and wanted to reprint my court testimony as part of an elder rights campaign. The fund would offer legal support to seniors facing financial manipulation by their own families, free consultations, real defense, a voice, when the world tried to treat them like luggage instead of people. I signed the final form, sealed it in an envelope, and walked it to the mailbox myself. When I slid it in, I didn't feel righteous. I just felt steady, like I was standing on new ground, like my story wasn't theirs to twist anymore. It was mine, and now it was going to help protect others from ever living what I had survived. 1 year later, I stood at the same cruise terminal where it had all begun. Only this time, I wasn't hiding, I wasn't running, I wasn't pretending to be okay while strangers danced around me. I was invited. I was the guest speaker at the National Elder Rights Summit, held on board that same ship, a gathering of people who knew exactly what it felt like to be betrayed by your own blood. I had my boarding pass in one hand and a welcome packet in the other, and when I looked up, there was Denise, waving from the second-floor balcony, Patricia beside her in a giant sun hat. I smiled and I didn't have to fake it. I still lived in the same house, but it didn't feel like a grave anymore. I'd painted the walls, bought a new rug, replaced the couch, rehung only the photos that made me feel strong, the rest reading pictures, baby portraits, reminders of people who didn't show up when it mattered. I packed in a box and put on a shelf in the garage, not out of hate, just clarity. When Mason saw me coming up the ramp, he was behind the bar in the same black polo, wearing the same easy smile. He handed me a glass of cranberry juice without a word. I tapped the rim like a toast. Still working? I asked. Stilling, he said, grinning. I found my cabin, unpacked just enough so I wouldn't look like a runaway, and slipped into the same cardigan. I wore the same cardigan I'd had on the day Vivian lost everything. That afternoon, I stood in front of about 200 people, seniors, social workers, lawyers, advocates, and I told them what it felt like to be discarded like old furniture, what it felt like to be robbed of your dignity by people who hugged you while they did it. I told them about the cruise, the will, the courtroom. I didn't cry until I said the words, and I came back stronger than when I left. The applause didn't feel like praise. It felt like a release, like letting go of a breath I'd been holding for years. That night, there was a gala on the top deck. Patricia was dancing with a man who swore he'd once sung backup for Barry Manilow. Denise was arguing with a waiter about the shrimp. I stood alone at the railing, watching the moon smear across the ocean like a white brushstroke. And I thought about Jeff. I wondered what he would say if he could see me now, whole, steady, not angry anymore, just sure, not grieving, just aware. I wasn't trying to get back what I'd lost. I was finally living what I'd earned. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Kevin, just one sentence. I got a job helping seniors apply for housing. I stared at it for a long time before typing back, good, stay with it. I didn't add anything else. I didn't need to. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and leaned into the wind, letting the sea air sting my face. The ship started to move slow at first, then steady and strong, cutting through the water, like it knew exactly where it was going. Behind me were people who had tried to erase me. Ahead of me was a life I had built with both hands, with no one's permission. I didn't look back, not even once.